Hello, this is Scott Conway, PhD GAD with mothersrasingsons.com. This series is Parenting is Leadership. Now, this is a very basic introduction to some very fundamental leadership concepts. We're not getting all the way into the 4P360 leadership system. We're just going to talk about a handful of basics. A basic of parenting is be the example, explain the example you're being. And this is what I teach as a fundamental leadership. Is where what someone else needs to do is something similar to what you're doing, you be the example, and then you explain the example you're being. Now, part of the reason you explain the example you're being is you want people to understand the example, because sometimes their interpretation of what they see may not necessarily line up with what it is exactly that you're saying. So say, for instance, if we're going to talk about we'll use the physical relationship between a husband and wife. So when I head off to the bedroom with my wife, that's okay. We're married, we're adults, it's our home, it's our relationship. We have a right to make that choice. But say if one of our teenagers, and they haven't done this because, they understand this, but if one of our teenagers says, well, but you guys head off to the bedroom by yourself, what's wrong if I head off to the bedroom with my girlfriend by ourselves? Because that's doing what you do. You guys are my example. I'm just modeling your example. I'm doing copy, copy, copy. So part of the explain the example you're being is, no, we're not doing this because we're a man and a woman and we're dating. We're doing this because we're a husband and a wife. We can do this even for the couples that aren't husbands and wives who still make this choice as independent adults. They can make this choice because they're independent adults, because it's their home. They get to decide what freedoms they allow themselves at their home. You're underage, or maybe they're adults, but you're still living under our roof. You're asking us to provide for you the place for you to do this, and at this time we decline to do this. That may change in the future. We can have this discussion. And so when you're looking at some of the places where you're being the example, is it okay for a husband and wife to head off to the bedroom and go sleep together? Of course it is. Is it okay for your 15-year-old son to head off to the bedroom by himself with his 15-year-old girlfriend and go spend the night? That's probably not going to be okay. So that's a case where you are being a good example, but there's components to it you want to make sure are explained. So in general, on things like, being honest, be the example and explain the example you're being. When you're demonstrating integrity and stuff that the kids may not necessarily see, where you're the good example, make sure you explain that to them, that you tell them the stories. And so where you've been the good example in the past, feel free to tell those stories and explain the example. Now, there's other things you can do if you haven't been the good example all the time, and we're going to talk about that in lesson number 2, but in parenting as leadership, basic leadership is be a good example. And then part of being a leader is then explain the example that you're being. This is Scott Conway, PhD GAD, mothersrasingsons.com.